Today, we're uncovering the 6 worst deaths ever on live TV. From a boxer suddenly collapsing after a single punch to a daredevil balancing on a dangerous line hundreds of feet above the ground, where the record came in the worst way possible. It was August 23, 2015, and midday sun beat down on a 14-story concrete hotel on the outskirts of Atlanta. The building had sat vacant for 3 years and was scheduled for controlled demolition. 2 local news stations were broadcasting the event live, and spectators had gathered behind barricades set several hundred feet from the structure. Gavin Mercer was 41 years old and had worked as a demolition engineer for 16 years, overseeing more than 60 controlled implosions across the southeastern United States. Colleagues described him as meticulous but overconfident, someone who trusted his own calculations absolutely and pushed back on outside review. The demolition plan called for several hundred pounds of charges placed across the building's first 4 floors in a precisely timed sequence designed to fold the structure inward on itself. The firing sequence involved 3 time delays, each separated by roughly half a second, pulling the building's core downward before the outer walls followed. 2 days before the demolition, an independent structural assessor hired by the property owner flagged concerns about the building's east-facing support columns. A previous renovation had reinforced them with additional steel, which the original survey had not fully accounted for. The assessor recommended adding supplemental charges to the east side to ensure symmetric collapse. Gavin reviewed the findings and dismissed them, arguing that the existing charge placement provided sufficient redundancy. He signed off on the demolition plan without modifications. The assessor documented his objection, but had no authority to override. On the morning of the demolition, Gavin positioned himself at the command post, approximately 450 feet from the building's east face, well within the established perimeter, but in a location he had used on dozens of previous jobs. A safety officer suggested he relocate to the backup post on the north side, which offered better shielding behind a concrete parking structure. Gavin declined, saying he needed a clear sightline to the east wall. The countdown began just after noon on the live broadcast. At 0, the firing system activated. The first 2 sequences detonated as planned, and the building's center began to buckle inward. Then, the 3rd sequence reached the reinforced east columns. The charges fractured the concrete, but failed to sever the steel reinforcement completely. Instead of folding inward, the east wall resisted for roughly 2 seconds before shearing away as a massive intact slab. A large section of the east wall toppled outward rather than collapsing downward. It landed well beyond the anticipated collapse line, sending concrete fragments and debris farther than expected. A chunk of concrete roughly the size of a car tire traveled outward and struck the command post. The impact hit Gavin directly, throwing him backward into the equipment behind him. The live broadcast captured the collapse and the massive dust cloud that followed. Producers cut the feed within seconds as screams became audible from the spectator area. Emergency crews already staged nearby reached Gavin within 2 minutes. He was unresponsive with severe head and chest injuries. Paramedics initiated resuscitation efforts, but he showed no signs of neurological activity. He was transported to a nearby trauma center, where physicians confirmed injuries incompatible with survival. Gavin was pronounced dead approximately 40 minutes after the blast. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from massive blunt force trauma to the head and chest, including catastrophic skull fractures and severe internal injuries. State and federal investigators cited the failure to account for the reinforced columns as the primary cause. The demolition firm's operations were temporarily halted pending investigation, and the independent assessor's written objection became central evidence in the wrongful death lawsuit filed by Gavin's family. It was June 21st, 2016, and late afternoon sun angled across a massive gorge in the southwestern desert where a steel cable stretched 1,400 feet between 2 cliff edges. The gorge dropped approximately 280 feet to a boulder-strewn riverbed below. A television network had positioned 12 cameras along both rims to broadcast the crossing live. Landry Voss was 37 years old and had established himself as a professional wire walker through increasingly ambitious performances over 14 years. Associates described him as confident to the point of dismissiveness, particularly regarding environmental factors he believed he could compensate for through skill. The network special had been promoted for 6 weeks as a live broadcast event. Landry's team had installed the 2-inch diameter steel cable 3 days earlier, with setup including a safety tether system consisting of a parallel cable designed to catch him if he fell while wearing a full-body harness. On the morning of the crossing, meteorologists warned that afternoon winds would intensify, with gusts potentially reaching 25 miles per hour by early evening. Landry's safety coordinator recommended postponing until conditions stabilized after sunset, but Landry declined, citing the live broadcast schedule and stating he had crossed in similar winds before. The broadcast began shortly after 7 that evening. Cameras captured Landry at the departure platform, wearing soft leather shoes with custom soles and carrying a 43-pound, 38-foot aluminum balancing pole. Landry stepped onto the cable and began his crossing. For the first several minutes, his movement appeared controlled. He paused occasionally, adjusting his pole position to compensate for minor wind variations. Approximately 620 feet from the departure point, roughly midway across where the cable sagged lowest, a sustained gust struck Landry from his right side. The wind pushed Landry's balancing pole sharply downward on the left side. He attempted to counter by shifting his weight right, but the pole's momentum was too great. The pole slipped from his grip and tumbled into the gorge. Without the pole's stabilizing mass, Landry's balance failed immediately. His arms windmilled as he tipped sideways off the cable. The safety tether engaged, and Landry dropped roughly 8 feet before the harness arrested his fall. He hung suspended beneath the cable, swaying in the wind. The broadcast continued. Cameras focused on Landry as he reached upward, attempting to grab the safety cable. For approximately 40 seconds, he struggled to gain purchase, his movements visible to the live audience. Moments later, the connection point failed. Investigators later determined that the carabiner had not been fully secured through the primary load-bearing loop of the harness. Under sustained tension and lateral movement, the improperly positioned connection shifted and disengaged from the tether. The attachment separated. Landry fell without obstruction. The live broadcast captured his descent for several seconds before he struck a cluster of boulders near the riverbed. His body came to rest among the rocks and did not move. Rescue personnel reached the canyon floor via helicopter approximately 25 minutes later. Paramedics found Landry deceased with injuries incompatible with survival. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from massive blunt force trauma involving catastrophic fractures of the skull, spine, pelvis, and extremities, with extensive internal organ disruption. Investigators documented the improperly secured carabiner and cited inspection procedures and weather assessment as contributing factors. The network issued a public apology and suspended similar live stunt programming pending internal review. Landry's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit that resulted in a confidential settlement. It was March 11th, 2017, when a Las Vegas arena filled for a televised welterweight championship bout. Pay-per-view cameras, positioned at multiple angles, prepared to broadcast the fight live to an international audience. Cortez Manuel was 26 years old, with a professional boxing record of 18 wins against 2 losses. Standing 5'10" and weighing 147 pounds, he had earned his title shot through decisive victories, showcasing aggressive counterpunching. Trainers described Cortez as stubborn about acknowledging injuries, viewing any admission of weakness as threatening his competitive standing. 3 weeks before the bout, during a sparring session, Cortez absorbed several hard punches to the left side of his head. He experienced persistent headaches for 2 days, which he attributed to routine training strain. He treated the symptoms with over-the-counter medication, and the headaches had largely subsided by fight week. Medical examinations required by the Boxing Commission 1 week before the fight included basic physical assessment and neurological screening, but no advanced imaging. Cortez passed all standard tests. He did not disclose his recent symptoms during the pre-fight medical evaluation. The championship bout began shortly after 10 that evening. The first 3 rounds proceeded competitively, with both fighters landing scoring punches. Broadcast commentators noted Cortez's aggressive approach and willingness to trade punches in close quarters. In the 4th round, the challenger landed a right hook that connected solidly with the left side of Cortez's head. The punch appeared clean, but not unusually powerful. Cortez stepped backward briefly, then resumed his stance. Over the next 90 seconds, his defensive coordination visibly deteriorated. His guard dropped repeatedly, and his footwork became flat and unresponsive. With approximately 40 seconds remaining in the round, Cortez lowered his hands completely and stood motionless in the center of the ring. His eyes remained open but unfocused. The referee stepped between the fighters immediately. As the referee reached him, Cortez's legs gave out. He collapsed backward onto the canvas, his head striking the mat as his body stiffened. Medical personnel positioned at ringside entered within seconds. Cortez was unresponsive with irregular breathing. Emergency protocols were initiated immediately. An ambulance crew transported him to a nearby trauma center within 12 minutes. Neurosurgeons performed an emergency craniotomy to relieve intracranial pressure from a rapidly expanding subdural hematoma. Imaging revealed extensive bleeding between the brain and skull, with evidence of older hemorrhaging consistent with injury sustained weeks earlier. Despite surgery, neurological function did not recover. Cortez was pronounced dead later that night. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from acute subdural hematoma with brain herniation caused by cumulative head trauma. The autopsy documented prior bleeding that had partially resolved, indicating Cortez had entered the fight with a pre-existing but undetected brain injury. The Boxing Commission launched a formal review of medical screening procedures following the incident. The challenger was cleared of wrongdoing. Regulatory bodies later emphasized stricter neurological reporting and encouraged advanced imaging for fighters disclosing head injury symptoms during training camps. It was November 14th, 2018, and morning rush hour traffic moved slowly along an urban interstate under overcast skies. Temperatures hovered in the low 40s, with occasional drizzle. A local news station was broadcasting live from the highway shoulder, covering traffic delays caused by overnight road work. Bryn Kellerman was 32 years old and worked as a field reporter, covering breaking news, weather events, and daily traffic updates. She had joined the news team 4 years earlier, and colleagues described her as eager to distinguish herself through compelling on-location reporting. Colleagues noted she sometimes positioned herself closer to traffic than station guidelines advised. That morning, Bryn's assignment involved a live report from the interstate's southbound shoulder. The segment was intended to show traffic conditions and interview the construction supervisor. Station policy required reporters to wear reflective safety vests and position themselves at least 15 feet from the nearest travel lane. Bryn arrived around 6:15 with her camera operator and positioned the station van approximately 30 feet behind the construction zone. She put on her safety vest and conducted a brief equipment test. The live segment was scheduled for 6:45. As the anchor introduced the report, cameras cut to Bryn standing on the shoulder with traffic visible behind her, moving at reduced speeds. Bryn delivered her introduction, explaining the road work and its impact on commute times. She then stepped closer to the active lanes to gesture at the traffic, moving to within approximately 8 feet of vehicles passing at speeds estimated between 35 and 45 miles per hour. As she continued speaking, a sedan traveling in the right lane, approximately 150 feet behind her, began drifting steadily onto the shoulder without visible braking. The vehicle was traveling at approximately 40 miles per hour. The camera operator noticed the vehicle's approach and shouted a warning. Bryn turned toward the sound, but had only moments to react. She attempted to move away, but lost her footing on the wet grass. The sedan struck Bryn directly, the impact throwing her forward onto the pavement. The vehicle continued onto the grass, sideswiping the news van before coming to rest. The camera operator ran to Bryn while calling for emergency services over his radio. The station's broadcast cut immediately to the studio, but the audio feed remained active for several seconds before producers terminated the connection. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and found Bryn unresponsive with severe head and chest trauma. Advanced life support measures were initiated, and she was transported to a nearby trauma center during ongoing resuscitation efforts. Physicians worked for over an hour attempting to stabilize her condition, but her injuries were determined to be non-survivable. She was pronounced dead approximately 90 minutes after the collision. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from severe traumatic brain injury with skull fractures and intracranial hemorrhaging, combined with multiple rib fractures, pulmonary contusions, and liver laceration. The driver was arrested and later charged with vehicular manslaughter and driving under the influence after toxicology confirmed alcohol impairment. The station later revised its roadside reporting safety guidelines following the incident. Bryn's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit that was settled confidentially. It was April 11th, 2015, when stadium lights illuminated a packed Supercross arena outside Phoenix. Spectators filled metal bleachers surrounding the dirt track as 22 riders prepared for the 9th round of the national championship. Multiple sports networks carried the race live. Evening temperatures remained warm, and track officials completed final inspections before the main event. Dane Strickland was 24 years old and competed professionally in the 250 SX class. Over several seasons, he had built a reputation as a talented but aggressive rider who pushed himself and his equipment hard during competition. That afternoon during practice, his team mechanic detected unusual play in the motorcycle's front fork assembly after a series of heavy landings. The mechanic recommended replacing the fork seals and inspecting the damping cartridge, estimating the work would take roughly 90 minutes. Dane declined the repair, stating the bike still felt stable. The mechanic documented the recommendation and the refusal, then rechecked visible components before qualifying concluded. No external leaks were observed at the time, and the bike was cleared for the main event. Shortly after 8 that evening, the starting gate dropped. Engines roared as riders accelerated into the first turn. Dane held mid-pack position through the opening laps. The course's most technical feature was a triple jump, requiring riders to launch from a steep ramp, clear roughly 60 feet, and land on a downslope before entering a left-hand turn. Riders typically approached at speeds near 50 miles per hour. On the 4th lap, broadcast cameras followed Dane as he accelerated toward the triple. His approach speed matched prior laps. As the motorcycle left the ramp, the front suspension compressed normally, but on landing, the compromised damping system failed to absorb the impact. The front fork collapsed abruptly, unable to stabilize the downward force. The bike pitched forward. Dane was thrown over the handlebars as the motorcycle continued down the landing ramp. He tumbled across the downslope, striking headfirst. Despite wearing a full-face helmet, the motorcycle separated and slid to a stop several yards away. Race officials immediately waved red flags. Medical personnel on track vehicles reached him within seconds. Dane was unconscious and breathing irregularly. His cervical spine was stabilized before he was secured to a backboard and transported by ambulance to a nearby trauma center. Despite emergency surgery to relieve intracranial pressure, Dane never regained consciousness. He was pronounced dead approximately 4 hours after the crash. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from severe traumatic brain injury with associated skull fractures and diffuse axonal injury, along with multiple cervical spine fractures. Investigators later confirmed failure within the front fork's damping cartridge caused by internal seal deterioration and hydraulic fluid loss, reducing the suspension's ability to absorb landing forces. The sanctioning body initiated a mechanical review following the incident and emphasized stricter pre-race inspection procedures. Dane's family later established a foundation advocating for enhanced mechanical safety awareness in competitive motorsport. It was July 4th, 2019, and late afternoon light reflected off the glass face of a 42-story hotel tower on the Las Vegas Strip. A temporary platform had been constructed on the rooftop observation deck, roughly 480 feet above street level. A cable television network was broadcasting a live holiday special featuring a series of extreme stunts, with the final act being a base jump from the tower. Nolan Ferris was 33 years old and had completed over 900 base jumps across 11 years, including exits from buildings, bridges, antennas, and cliff faces around the world. He held a skydiving license with over 4,000 freefall jumps. Friends described him as calculated but susceptible to external pressure, someone who sometimes accepted conditions he would normally reject when sponsors or cameras were involved. The jump plan called for Nolan to exit the platform, freefall for approximately 3 seconds, then initiate deployment of a single pilot chute to extract his main canopy. A designated landing zone had been cleared in a hotel parking area directly below. Base jumping rigs do not carry reserve parachutes due to the low altitudes involved, making the single deployment the only opportunity. During the pre-jump equipment check that afternoon, Nolan's rigger noticed that the pilot chute's bridle line showed minor fraying near the attachment point. The rigger recommended swapping the entire deployment system, a process that would take approximately 20 minutes. Nolan examined the bridle himself and judged the wear to be superficial. He told the rigger the equipment was fine and that replacing it would delay the broadcast window. The live segment began shortly after 7 that evening. Cameras positioned on the rooftop, on adjacent buildings, and at street level captured Nolan standing on the platform edge with the city skyline behind him. A countdown graphic appeared on screen. At 0, Nolan stepped off the platform and entered freefall. His body position appeared stable and controlled as he accelerated downward. At approximately 3 seconds into the fall, Nolan reached back with his right hand and threw the pilot chute. Cameras from an adjacent rooftop captured what happened next. The pilot chute inflated briefly, then the frayed bridle line partially separated under load. Rather than cleanly extracting the main canopy from the container, the pilot chute fluttered erratically, generating insufficient drag. The main canopy began to emerge, but never fully inflated, streaming uselessly behind Nolan as a tangled ribbon of fabric. Nolan was seen reaching back with both hands, attempting to manually pull the canopy free. His altitude was now below 150 feet and dropping rapidly. He struck the pavement of the parking area approximately 6 seconds after exit. The impact was captured by multiple cameras before producers cut the broadcast. Street-level audio recorded screams from the crowd that had gathered to watch. Emergency medical personnel staged in the landing zone reached him within seconds. Nolan was found deceased with massive injuries. No resuscitation was attempted. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from catastrophic blunt force trauma, consistent with high-velocity vertical impact, including severe head, spinal, and internal injuries. Federal and state investigators documented the bridle line failure and criticized the decision to proceed with compromised equipment. Nolan's rigger gave a detailed statement confirming his pre-jump warning had been overruled. The network reached a confidential settlement with Nolan's family and permanently ended its live stunt programming. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.